Hello there everybody, Brandon here coming to you from the gallery and studio, and so I got back into some of my small canvas work today for this video. This time around we're going to be looking at a little turquoise wave beach scene here. So if you want to paint along with this one, let's go now. Alright, so what I have here is a small 6x8 canvas that I'm going to be doing this project on for you, and I'm going to start with a wash brush here that I've got. It's a little bit of a worn down wash brush that I'm going to be just doing some of the initial blocking in and background work with. I'm going to start with the sky, so I'm just going to put in a really light blue value up here, maybe even mixing a little bit of white just for some distant hazy kind of clouds, and we're going to let that dry because I'm going to come back and put a piece of masking tape over the horizon line of that before we put our water line in to keep our water line nice and straight. So we'll need to let that sky dry good before we do that. So let's go ahead and get started with the sky here. I'm going to go into mostly titanium white with just a tiny little bit of blue. That's about all I'm going to do for my sky. Alright, now that this background is good and dry, I'm going to come in here with a piece of masking tape to get my nice straight horizon line, or at least that's the hope. I'm going to come in here and put it across somewhere in that vicinity. Now I'm going to start putting the water in, which I'm going to start out with a darker color back there on the horizon, and I'm going to fade a really dark blue, maybe even a touch of green into that, up into more of a turquoise kind of lighter blue up here in the front that the wave is going to be on. So I'm going to go into mostly phthalo blue with just a tiny little bit of, just a touch of raw umber in it, and maybe a hint of sap green in there as well. Gives a nice rich dark blue color. And I'm going to come back here and drop that in right across my piece of masking tape. And now I'm going to start dropping in a little bit of titanium white into that mix to lighten it up a little bit. Something about like that. And I'm going to give that a second to dry, and then we'll take our masking tape off of there. Alright, now that we've given this a few minutes to dry, let's get our masking tape off of there and see what kind of horizon line we have come up with. Works pretty good for me. So now we're going to come in here with what's going to be the main part of our crashing wave across the area through here. Now to do that, I'm going to block in an area of a light kind of pale turquoise kind of green color is what I'm going to go with, and you can mix that up with mostly white, touch of green in there, touch of blue in there, even maybe a touch of yellow if you need it, but get you a nice kind of a pale turquoise green value we're going to come right through this midsection with, and we're going to fade that into a light tan kind of sandy beach sand color that will then come up to the front corner. So I'm going to come right across the middle and the top line of that doesn't have to be straight at all because it's going to be what creates the top of our wave, so don't worry about that. Just get you a nice piece of that lighter color right through the middle there. And then I'm going to fade that down into the light sandy beach color. So I'm going to use mostly titanium white for that, and a tiny little touch of raw umber in it, maybe a hint of some yellow ochre. And we're going to fade that in the bottom of that wave because that wave is going to be sucking some of that sand up as it starts to curl out there. There. Now, we'll let this dry and then we'll come back in and start detailing our wave out. Alright, now that our base layer here is pretty dry, I'm going to first come back in and in the distance here on our water and put in a little bit of the reflections. So basically we're trying to reflect the sky and the atmosphere back there. So I'm going to come in with that little bit lighter blue value and I'm going to thin it down a good bit, and I'm just going to horizontally touch it through, make some choppy little strokes to give us an indication of some reflection on the water back there. And while it's wet, I'm just going to drag my finger across it. This technique I'm using for my reflections, when I'm thinning it down a good bit, it's almost like glazing, because I want a lot of that color of the water to still show through there, but I want to give the indication that there are also reflections from the sky coming through. So if you've ever done any kind of glazing type stuff where you thin down a color a good bit, that's pretty much what I'm doing here. But then I don't thin it down as much as I'm getting closer to the viewer here. So I thin it down a good bit off in the distance, and then as I move forward I don't thin it down as much. Alright, I like that pretty well. So now I need to define out the top of our wave here. This section that we put into this lighter color is kind of going to be the center of that breaking wave. So we need to get the top edge of it defined out. And to do that, we're going to go back into that color. I'm going to darken it up just a little bit where it's curling over at the top. It wouldn't be quite as thin as it is in here with the sun shining through it. So we're going to go back into that green color, but we're not going to have it quite as bright with the titanium white in it, to basically create the top end of our wave. And again, you don't have to make the top of this wave obviously any kind of straight or parallel. I mean, it is an ocean wave, so it can be doing any number of things. But I'm going with just a little bit darker green of that teal kind of color that we put in before. And now maybe we're going to have a few places where it's really kind of curling down in there. So to do that, we just need to work with our lighter value and our darker value in there and create those shapes. So in the middle of the wave body itself, we're going to have a much lighter value of that green in here. So in this area here, you know, I can really lighten that green up with a little more white. And then as that wave comes to the top and starts to curl over, it will start to darken up as it bends in that light. So basically fade your lighter green into a little darker green as it moves up. And at the very top of that wave, I'll make it the absolute darkest. I'll introduce a little bit of blue back into there. Maybe just a hint, tiny little touch of some raw umber. And then we can draw in essentially where the top of our wave is kind of crashing in. And you just kind of pick what looks good to you. I mean, no two waves are alike, obviously. So you can see we've kind of created a little bit of a dark top line up there, and then maybe a place or two where it even spills down in over our lighter midsection, which we will then put some white highlight on the top of that where that wave is crashing in, and then maybe even down in here, maybe there's a little bit of one coming in. Something like that. Now I want to fade out the bottom of that wave into our sand kind of the same way, where those two things are kind of coming together. It's going to be a little darker in here and shaded in here, and it's going to be fading into that sand because it's going to be drawing that sand color up into the wave. So I'm going to go back into my sand mix, but I'm going to darken it up with a little bit more brown. And then maybe add a little bit of this teal color to it as well. And we're going to come right in here in the middle and darken up a little area. Now what we want to do is kind of fade this out. We'll start coming down into the bottom here where this is going to fade out into this lighter sand. And this can be a very uneven, kind of broken looking line down here. Now we want to fade it back up the other direction, so to that sand mix we're going to lighten it up just a tad. And come with just a little bit lighter brown on that top edge. And now I'm going to lighten it up just a hair more and then add a lot of that green teal color to it and come right on the top edge still. Just kind of work that color up to where we fade it up into our green wave. And then we make sure we get our lightest value of that right in the middle. A little bit more white in there. Giving us something to that effect right there. So now I'm going to work on this sand that's out here in the front end. So I'm gonna have a little area here that the water is not covering, but it's still gonna be wet sand for the most part. So I'm going to come in with my raw umber and titanium white here on this front corner. Darken it up just a little. Something about like that. Now let's start to work on our crashing wave here. So the first thing I'm going to put in is kind of the shadowed value of my white where the crashing waves are happening so that our white can stand out. So I'm going to go into our kind of teal watercolor and add a tiny bit of black to that to darken it down a bit. Then I'm going to use titanium white to get it kind of to the value that I'm looking for. That might do for now. So I'm going to have an area here where this wave is really crashing in. I'll bring in this shadow color. Then underneath that area there, I want to bring in a little bit more of a darker value where it's kind of shaded. I'm going to bring in a little bit more black into that mix. And right along the base of this area, really darken that in a little bit. Now we can start creating our splashing water effects. So I'm just going to take that same mix and add more titanium white to it. And start touching the canvas with it to create these splashy little water details. And we're going to leave some of that shadowed color in there. So don't cover it all up. Now down there along that bottom edge that we've darkened up, I want to create a fairly distinct line. Now I'm going to start to carry that color, and I'm not at pure titanium white here still, I'm just at a lighter value of our shaded color. I'm going to start bringing that over a little bit. Start creating a few splashes up in the air here off the top end of this wave. And on the top edges of where we have brought this dark in, we're going to bring that, touch that shadowy color in as well. And just randomly bring that down into some places because there's all kinds of white foamy things going on down in here. Alright, I can see I need to carry my shade line just a little bit further down here to the bottom of where this darker brown area is, and bring that crashing wave down just a little bit further. So I'm going to bring that shaded color down a little further. And then extend my crashing wave down to that. Now I also want to bring in this area here that's darker, where it's sucking that sand up into that wave. I need to bring that color up into a few places to give us the illusion that it's kind of curling and bending in some of those areas. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go back into that brown color and just fade it up into a couple of spots. Creating that idea that that is getting pulled up into that wave a little bit. Alright, now we're going to start putting in some of these little squiggly, foamy little white lines that are all over the place on these crashing waves. Going back into this color that we've been using here on this part of our crashing wave. We're going to start putting in, and this is where you can start to shape this wave a little bit. Because what you'll have here is when this is starting to get sucked up into this wave, it'll start to curl. So along here, these lines will be a lot flatter. And you just randomly put some stuff in here that'll be a little bit shaded in some places, and then we'll lighten it up. And then as they come up this face here, they start to move upwards. So again, down here along this base, you leave things pretty flat. And then you start to move them up the face of your wave as they go up this direction. Now we're just going to introduce a little more white to that mix to brighten things up a bit. And these little white foamy things are very random, so I mean, you just kind of drop them in wherever your brush lands. A little bit too dark on my shadow color there. We need to lighten that up a bit. Maybe even a little more than that. That's a little better. Now I'm going to switch brushes, something a little smaller, a little finer. Let's go with a little small spotter brush here. And I'm going to start going into just some titanium white and start drawing in little sharper lines. Onto some of this. Again, coming up this wave, we need to give the illusion that things are moving up and starting to curl. And just draw little crazy squiggly lines everywhere. Now up in the wave from about that midpoint up, I'm not carrying my pure titanium white up in there because the sun's probably not directly hitting any of that in there. So it won't be quite as bright white up in that midpoint of the face and up underneath where it's curling. So I'm saving my brightest whites for these areas out here that the sun is shining on. And again, don't cover up all of your shadowed areas down in there. Leave some of that visible where it'll be underneath where the foamy stuff is crashing around. I need to hit a few of these areas here on the top lines. We would have sun hitting this up here as well. Just dotting in some bright white along the tops of this stuff. Just anywhere that you see where the sunlight would be catching some splash and some wave, put that brighter highlight in there. I think I want to carry the top of this thing all the way around like this. Now maybe put a few more of my shaded squigglies underneath here. Little foamy stuff that's going on in there. It's being curled around to the top. Now our little shaded darker green color that's coming in here, just for purposes of trying to add a little more detail in here, I'm going to bring that down into the wave face a little bit more, almost like I'm highlighting ripples and waves. And just kind of squiggle line that thing down in some areas too where it would be bending some of that light coming in here. Now these little foam lines that are coming up the face of this wave, I mean, you can do this stuff until you're tired of it, but however much you want to stick in there in terms of details and what's going on, it's entirely up to you. I mean, you go until you're happy with the way your wave looks. Now I think I want to work on this front edge a little bit. I'm going to get a nice little line here of separation by bringing in just a little bit darker brown value than what I've got there for like a shaded edge. So I'm gonna move into a little raw umber here and see what I get. Just trying to create a line of separation here where there's going to be some shaded contrast right underneath the front lip of where my crashing foam is going to be here at the front end. And now on top of that dark line, I'm going to go back into my white and basically put some foamy stuff right over the top of that. And my biggest foamy highlights over where my dark area is the widest there. Something like that. And so the last thing that we're going to do here is add our little splatter water effects. And I like a short, stiff bristled brush. This is just a stiff bristled short round. And I'm going to thin out some white paint so we can flick it off the end of our brush here. And I'm going to start over here where my biggest wave is. And I'm going to just start flicking and splattering in some paint. This is another step that you can literally flick in as much or as little as you want. And you may want to practice on something if you've never done this before first, just to get an idea of how your splatter is going to come out. I'm coming right along the top edge. And just again, wherever you want more splatter, just make a few passes in those places. I think over here on my big wave is where I'm going to have the most action. Alright, well again, that's another part of the process that you can kind of do as little or as much as you want, and you can touch it up and do whatever, you know, other effects and highlights as you want in there as well. But for this tutorial, I'm going to call that a finished product. So there is our beach wave here, our turquoise crashing wave scene that we've done. I hope you've got a wave that you're happy with there. And until next time, happy painting, everybody.